Chapter 1. Decisions or habits. The things you do without thinking are habits, but do you decide to do them, or do they happen without free will? A paper published by a researcher at Duke University showed that 40% of actions done every single day weren't actual decisions, but habits that have been formed over time. Most decisions we think we make are actually habits we form over the long term. We think that we have control over everything we do, but our habits control us to a certain extent. The good news is that the negative habits can be changed, but it takes time and effort to do so. Over the last 20 years, researchers have gone into great depth trying to understand how habits are formed and how they work. Within this, studies have also tried to understand how habits can also be changed. Change might not be fast, and it isn't always easy, but with time and effort, almost any habit can be reshaped. Charles Duhigg. Charles Duhigg, author, became interested in habits around 8 years ago when he was working for the media in Baghdad. He likens the US military to a huge experiment into how habits are formed because every single action performed is done like clockwork, habitually every single day. All of this is done by basic training to the point of automation. This led him to want to understand more about how habits are formed and how they can control our lives. Proceed to the next chapters to discover his research. Chapter 2. Habits help to save your brain power. In order to understand how habits are formed, we need to delve into something called the habit loop. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology is home to the Brain and Cognitive Sciences Department. Within this department, you will find many small operating theaters with various machines which experiment on sedated rats. These experiments are designed to learn more about habits. These experiments began in the 1990s when researchers became interested in a deep part of the brain called the basal ganglia. It is thought that this part of the brain, which is found deep inside, close to the brainstem, is one of the more primitive parts of the important organ. It is the size of a golf ball, and it has been a mystery to researchers many years. However, these experiments have helped them to understand more. They found that the basal ganglia plays an important part in understanding and remembering patterns, forming the behavior linked to them. This part of the brain acts as a storage area for habits during waking and sleeping hours. The basal ganglia is a part of the brain which is linked with habit formation. The brain is complex, but it's always looking for ways to try and save you energy and effort. Habits do this because they are part of a routine. They're done without much thought going into them once they are set inside the brain. Habits do not require thought or caution. They happen automatically. Once a habit is formed, decision-making related to that habit slows down and stops, therefore saving energy. If you fight the habit and work to change it, the process reverts back on itself. Otherwise, your brain is basically on autopilot relating to that particular habit. Did you know between 40 and 95% of what we do on a daily basis falls into the category of habit? Chapter 3. A 3-step process to form habits. The habit loop consists of 3 steps: a cue, a routine, and finally, a reward. These 3 steps help to form the habit, but also encourage them to become stronger and finally push them to happen. Habits are made by 3 steps: a cue, a routine, a reward. The cue is a trigger, something which forces your brain into autopilot, making it choose which habit it's going to use. The routine can be physical, or it can be mental or emotional. This is the way your brain recognizes the habit once more. And finally, we have the reward. This is what your brain uses in order to decide whether or not this action is worth becoming a habit. Your brain likes to have something to make everything worthwhile. A pleasant reward is required to formalize a habit in your mind. The cue can literally be anything, but the routine can be complex or simple. The reward is usually something which gives you a very pleasant physical sensation, forcing your brain to recognize the good feeling. Charles Duhigg gives us the example of fast food. Perhaps you're driving home from work and the kids are hungry, but you're tired and can't think of what to make for dinner. You see the McDonald's sign and you think it's cheap and quick, so once won't hurt. This eventually becomes a habit, without you even meaning for it to be. Your brain recognizes the reward of not having to cook dinner, a quick fix which doesn't cost a lot of money, and that becomes attractive. Whenever you see the McDonald's sign from that point on, you'll be tempted to go back. This is all part of the habit loop. Did you know the most common bad habit is nail biting? Chapter 4. How companies take advantage of your habits. It's entirely possible for a company to make money from your habits. This is done by giving you a cue that encourages you to find the reward. Remember, Your brain is always looking for a reward. Some of the biggest companies on the planet work in this way, giving you a very tempting cue, which forces the trigger for your 3-step loop to commence. After that, the habit is firmly ingrained over time, and you go back to purchase their goods again and again. Dollar signs in their eyes. They're basically causing you to crave their products. Marketers from big companies work in this way. Give you a very tempting cue, which forces a trigger for your 3-step loop to commence. Large companies use the power of habit in order to get you to spend more money. Charles Duhigg gives us the example of Quaker Oats, breakfast cereal which claimed to give you a full boost of energy for 24 hours, with the proviso that you had to eat it every morning. There are also medicines which are marketed to clear up skin conditions or even get rid of joint pain, but you have to take them as quickly as possible when you notice the symptoms and then regularly after that. These are triggers, cues, which form a routine. The reward is that you feel and look better, something everyone wants. Did you know the parts of the brain that are connected to rewards are located in the cortico-basal ganglia thalamocortical loop? Chapter 5. Why signals and cravings are important when forming habits. Put simply, advertising is linked to psychology, pushing us toward temptation and then purchasing. Your brain then starts to crave the reward associated with the habit, causing a neurological craving. A neurological craving is when your brain craves the reward of an established habit. Cravings and habits are so closely linked that researchers at New Mexico State University conducted a study in 2002. They wanted to find out why people exercise regularly. Example, it becomes a habit. Nobody wants to get up early and go to the gym, becoming tired and sweaty, but many of us do it on a habit loop. Why? Out of the 266 people they studied, all exercising 3 times per week, they found that most started randomly, simply because they felt stressed out or had a little spare time on their hands. The reasons they carried on exercising are quite interesting, and it all came down to their brains craving the reward. Example, the endorphins, which are released during exercise and cause you to feel on a temporary high. 92% of those studied then reported that they carried on exercising as a habit because of how it made them feel. This is also shown in advertising. The craving pushes the habit to form, but you also need a signal that it's working, something to give you proof. For instance, toothpaste is often marketed with a tingly feeling. Toothpaste doesn't need this tingly feeling to clean your teeth effectively, but it is added in because it makes your brain think it's working. The same goes for shampoo. It doesn't need to foam to work. But when we see the foam, we assume the shampoo is really cleaning our hair well. These things are added in as signals to help push the habit for you to keep using them and buying them. Very clever indeed. Advertisers often add something into their products to give you proof that it is working. This strengthens the reward and habit association. All of this shows that cravings are real habit drivers. And if you work out how you can kick a craving into action, you can form a new habit quite easily. Did you know the Sony PlayStation is one of the biggest selling products in the world, possibly all down to habits? Chapter 6. Why it is easier to change old habits than form new ones. It is far easier to change a habit that you already have. For example, a bad habit, than it is to form a completely new one. The reason is because you already have a certain amount of information pertaining to that habit in your brain. You already have the cue, the routine, and the reward, and you just need to change certain parts of it rather than start from the beginning. When there's something familiar about a process, it is easier to change. The golden rule of habit change. You can't extinguish a bad habit. You can only change it. Charles Duhigg. Now, you can't get rid of bad habits, but you can change them and turn them into positive habits. You're basically only changing the middle section. You can change bad habits using the cue that is already there, but changing the routine in order to gain the same reward. This way of changing habits has been used in treatment for things like alcoholism, obesity, and even treating OCD. While you can't cure an addiction by changing a habit, you can help as part of the whole jigsaw puzzle. Charles Duhigg gives an example of a lady who habitually bit her nails. She was asked to carry around a card, and whenever she felt a cue to bite her nails, she was asked to put down a mark, creating a tally chart. She managed to do this and showed a large number of times she felt the cue, showing she was aware of the habit and it wasn't subconscious. She was then told whenever she felt that cue, she should change the routine part. For example, she should put her hands in her pocket or sit on her hands to stop herself from biting her nails. Then, she should find something which gave her a physical sensation, just like the nail-biting would. She tried rubbing her arm instead, therefore changing one habit, a damaging one, for another, less damaging one. In this case, the cue remains the same, but the routine changes in order to receive the same reward. For example, a physical sensation. Did you know cracking your knuckles is considered a bad habit? But between 24 and 54% of people do it worldwide. Chapter 7. What are keystone habits? Not all habits are bad, and some can be positive or very useful in starting. These are what Charles Duhigg calls a chain reaction. These habits help to change others and can be very influential. Keystone habits are habits which matter more than others, either in life or in business. They influence how you work, sit, live, spend money, and how you communicate. These are the basics from which everything else grows. Keystone habits are the basic points of life. For example, how to speak and how to walk. For instance, Michael Phelps would not have become a multiple Olympic champion without keystone habits. These habits also explain why certain students in college do better than others, seemingly against all odds. Self-discipline is one of these habits, and that includes not being late, working hard, overcoming obstacles. This is the keystone habit which is extremely positive and one which will see you through life towards success. Self-discipline is an important keystone habit to master. Charles Duhigg tells the story of Travis Leach, a boy who was witness to his father's overdose at just 9 years of age, going through a tough life afterwards before finally working his way up from barista to manager of 2 large Starbucks stores, managing around 40 employees. This was all through hard work and self-discipline. Champions don't do extraordinary things. They do ordinary things, but they do them without thinking. Too fast for the other team to react. They follow the habits they've learned. Charles Duhigg. Chapter 8. Can companies read your mind? You've no doubt heard of algorithms, the things that store information about you and predict your behavior. These are used by almost all large companies in order to help market the most suitable products to you, with the aim to result in a sale. Companies are therefore able to use prediction to manipulate your habits. Charles Duhigg highlights Target as one of the most successful companies to do this. Companies use technological algorithms to predict your purchasing habits and market their products to you. Habits can easily influence your decisions when shopping. For instance, a study showed that 5% of purchases were decided upon when customers saw the item in store, and not because they had planned to purchase. In this case, despite their very best intentions to save cash, their habits overrode them and forced a decision. Large companies such as Amazon, Capital One, Hewlett-Packard, the Bank of America, and Target, to name a few, use demographic information in order to predict what you might buy and what you might like. They then use the tactics we mentioned earlier, such as tempting you with things you're going to do to appreciate and causing a craving, to start the 3-step process. Chapter 9. How movements turn into habits. Charles Duhigg goes on to talk about habits in society and how these influence individual people and affect how they think and behave. He highlights the famous story of Rosa Parks, which kickstarted the biggest movement against racial inequality. Rosa Parks refusing to move to the back of the bus, an area designed for black people, began the civil rights movement and much of the equality we see today. Of course, there is still a lot to be done, and that is why movements and habits are so important. They are intrinsically linked. Rosa Parks' story wasn't just about defiance in the face of pressure. It was about social patterns too. Movements begin because of social habits, with friendships and close ties between various neighborhoods all playing a part. It gives a "we're all in this together" feel and allows a habit to grow. From there, the movement leader helps participants to develop new habits that help them to own the movement and a new sense of identity. Habits aren't always negative. They can kickstart social movements which create major change. By using the power of habits, we can actually kickstart new movements which will, hopefully, change the world and its injustices. Did you know Rosa Parks was arrested for not moving from her seat on the bus on December 1st, 1955? Chapter 10. Changing habits is an individual deal. There are countless ways to change a habit, but the most difficult part is that everyone is an individual. What works for one person may not work for another. Learning how to change a habit is a personal deal. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. Changing a specific habit is hard, and it's important to try various different methods to find the one that suits you. The power of habit is not designed to give you all the answers, but instead Charles Duhigg aims to help you understand how habits are formed and reiterate how they can be changed by effecting the 3-step method we talked about earlier. For instance, giving up smoking is a totally different situation than giving up eating too much sugar, just like changing how you talk to your partner is different from changing how you prioritize your workload. Habits can be formed in any niche of your life, but they can be changed too. Despite the type of habit you're trying to change, there are 4 main steps in order to get to work. 1. Identify the routine that forms the habit. For example, the cue, routine, and reward. 2. Try and experiment with the types of rewards. Example, change a negative reward, smoking, for something more positive, endorphins from exercise. Number 3. Work out what the cue is and try to tweak it. And finally, make a plan and go for it. Did you know, on average, it takes 66 days to change a bad habit to a positive? Conclusion. Habits are extremely powerful and cause us to do things we possibly don't really want to do without really thinking about it. Changing specific habits can be difficult, but it's certainly not impossible. By understanding how the brain forms habits, you can work to make a difference in your life. Try this. 1. Identify the habits which you want to change. 2. Think about the rewards which are important to you, whether they're positive or negative. And 3. Think carefully about the products you regularly purchase and identify whether your purchasing habits are being manipulated by companies using your habits to their own benefit.